This is the continuation of the documentary of Tamariki's exploration of Fiordland. This part 2 covers Breaksea Sound to Preservation Inlet. After we left Tamariki in Deep Cove, the reduced crew could expand to fill the extra space we left. I'll hand over to Pete to continue the story.
Before leaving Doubtful Sound, I wanted to visit the exit portal of the number 2 tail race tunnel of the Manapuri power station. No longer the construction site I had visited on many occasions between 1997 and 2000, when I worked for Reed Engineering installing rock reinforcements. The reinstatement of the site, I thought, was exceptional. More provisions were ordered from Tianao and another fill-up of diesel to top the tanks up, and Tamariki headed out to Blanket Bay for the night. The next morning we headed out to sail 34 miles around Breaksea Sound. Colin did a sterling job with fishing lure, landing 3 albacore tuna. At about 11:30 Tamariki entered Breaksea Sound, then motoring 5 miles into the sound to anchor at Beach Harbour, which is tucked in behind Harbour Island. Not much of a harbour as such, but provides shelter and water deep enough and suitable for anchoring, plus sandflies. Breaksea Sound is gorgeous, with many islands within it. It's a very pretty sight motoring inside Harbour Island and John Islands on our way to the next anchorage in Third Cove, about 7 miles further in, and one of the recommended anchorages. Our guide for all anchorages in Fiordland is the Fiordland Marine Guardian's book, Beneath Reflections. This very well produced publication is sent to you free when you receive your clean ship pass from Environment Southland. A clean ship pass is required before you can visit Fiordland. On the morning of the 6th of April, we actually sailed up the length of Vancouver Arm. Colin was busy taking photos of more waterfalls as we slowly cruised toward the upper end. About 2 miles from the end, our chart showed a shallow spot on the port side. It turned out to be more extensive and much more shallow than expected, requiring a quick jibe to avoid. Such is the very extensive and convoluted nature of these southern fords that after travelling some 60 miles, Hall Arm and Doubtful Sound is actually 2 3/4 miles southeast from the top end of this arm. With limited access to the shore and expected southwest breeze, we turned tail and headed back to Beach Harbour for the night. This time the 26-metre charter boat, Fiordland Jewel, was on her mooring, so we anchored at the very shallow fairway end of the harbour. Only about 3 boat lengths wide, we were surprised to see Fiordland Jewel ease her way past the next morning. We could almost have passed them a cup of coffee. Later that morning we visited Sunday Cove and stopped at Disappointment Cove for lunch, then down the Acheron passage to our next shelter in Mussel Cove at the entrance to Wet Jacket Arm.
Here we are at anchor in Mussel Cove in Wet Jacket Arm, right on the corner of Wet Jacket Arm. It's an absolutely magical little spot. It is 100% surrounded. We came in one end, we've got sort of three little islands and the mainland all around us. From where we are, you can't even see the opening.
In Mussel Cove there's only room for 1 boat, and you'd need to use 2 stern lines to hold you in the centre of the cove. Colin and Akemi once again doing sterling work with getting ropes ashore. It's completely enclosed and no weather can get at you. The price for this security, as always, is the pesky sandflies.
We are right at the very head of Wet Jacket Arm. This is where we've come from. We're surrounded by mountains that are around about 1,300 metres high. And there's Pete taking his own video.
It's quite a cold Overcast morning this morning. We've all got bloody extra layers on it. And we just said goodbye to Breaksea Girl at the top of the sound. We headed off to Sportsman's Cove on Cooper Island. Here's Colin wrapped up in his Sunday driving gear. Looks like a bunch of long stockings, thermal socks, thermal gloves, cap.
It's a fashion statement.
Yeah.
But we're now going up into the murk to find a little anchorage for the night called Sportsman's Cove.
Without a plotter, it would be very hard to find the entrance to these small coves, which in this case is only 35 metres wide. Trees and rocks look remarkably the same as you approach. Around half a mile in length and 1/4 wide, it's a very peaceful place. We decided to be cheeky and use the large mooring in the centre of the bay, hoping the owner would not arrive in the middle of the night. We were lucky that night, but were surprised the next day by the 28-metre charter vessel Flightless anchoring close by to discharge passengers by helicopter. Her upper deck is strengthened to take the helicopter loads, and all the handrails hinge down to provide room and extra security for wayward passengers. Fiordland Jewel was expected the next night, so we moved to anchor in the shallow water at the back of the bay and get out of the expected wind. Overnight, heavy rain turned the small river in the back of the bay into a torrent. The speed at which these torrents appear is amazing. Carrying tannins from the forest floor, they turn the water black. We're often floating in fresh water, sometimes well over a metre deep, sitting on the top of the salt water. We've lowered a little 12-volt submersible pump into the dinghy, and we're refilling the tanks with brand new, fresh, clean rainwater, because it pissed down last night. After more sightseeing, we ended up in Sunday Cove for the night. Breaksea Girl was on her mooring there and was having a crew change. This was also accomplished by a helicopter, which landed on the rocky shore alongside her. A quick tour of Fanny Bay saw us back in Sportsman's for another night.
We're just about to go through what's called 9 Fathom Passage, which is very narrow, and we're a bit nervous. As you can see, there's a couple of rocks there, but as we get to the entrance, we've also got a spectacular waterfall coming down.
Getting ready to leave. Anchor's coming up. Amazing how much difference it is when the sun's out. On our way to Cascade Cove. It's very cold. No sun. On our way down Long Sound, this is what it looks like. The Cook Channel down the inside of Long Island led us to another playground, which after a little exploring led us to the entrance of the Basin, another totally small enclosed anchorage. A tight entrance with a sharp right angle turn to port on the approach makes it really hard to find. The Basin is a coffing or storage area for lobster pots, and the port side of the anchorage has around 60 buoys in different colours to indicate owners, I guess. These unlet buoys were to be a headache on a subsequent visit. We thought we had a good holding in the back of this anchorage, but since there was no wind, it didn't really get tested. The next morning, 13th of April, we headed out to Cormorant Cove at the inner end of Five Finger Peninsula, intending to hide behind Pigeon Island for yet another blow. With lots of weed and uncertain holding, we felt unhappy with the spot even though we were tied to the shore with 2 stern lines, so we headed back to the Basin.
Rising to 35 knots in the west that night. Sea becoming very rough in the west. Moderate northwest swell, moderate northerly swell developing.
Around dinner time, the first of the night's breeze arrived. Why these adventures can't happen in daylight is always a puzzle to me. Around 8 p.m, our perfectly set anchor let go. 3 more tries and increasing wind were causing me huge concern, especially as one retrieval saw us uncomfortably close to the rocks. Pitch black with heavy rain, it was not fun. We should not have been there. Finally we decided the plough was never going to set, so we replaced it with our 60-pound fisherman anchor. While Colin and I were working on the anchor change, Akemi was doing her very best, using the engine to hold the boat into the wind. We could not go out to the middle of the basin for fear of getting our prop tangled in the rope of an unlit buoy. After repositioning boat in hopefully a good spot, Colin launched the anchor as I said to Akemi, "Well, I hope to God this works." I'm not used to asking for divine help, but we sure needed something. The fisherman set straight away, I guess digging right through the weed, and stopped us with a jolt, just like we were attached to a rock. All night long the wind did its best to rip that anchor out as we swung to and fro like a pendulum. All night long I sat in the cockpit trying to figure out which of the rocky shores behind us would be the safest final resting spot if something broke. I decided that if all else failed, I would attempt to beach Tamariki in behind a small islet at the head of the bay where the wave action would be the least. It was horrible. I chose the wrong anchorage and could have paid a very heavy price for that poor decision. During that night, some small comfort was given by our plotter recording our movements and our Vespa Marine AIS anchor watch facility showing where we were in relation to our anchor. The highest gust recorded was 46 knots. It was really noisy. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, the wind stopped, the rain eased, we had breakfast and left, vowing never to come back to the basin if a northwest gale was forecast.
Well, we decided to exit the basin due to the all-night anchoring techniques. So we pulled the pick and we're heading over to a little place called Cascade Cove, which is just over there. Just had a bit of a tiki tour into Cascade Cove, which shallows up into one of the few low valleys that we have come across. Really nice little anchorage. We should have been here the other night instead of that hellhole we ended up in. Never mind. Little barge houseboat is for the helicopter base, and a dry dock there for their own tender. We tied up alongside it, and it's a very nice setup. I wouldn't mind one of those myself.
Pickersgill Harbour, tucked securely in behind Crayfish Island, afforded us a secure anchorage for the next night. Pickersgill Harbour was used by Captain Cook during his 1773 voyage to observe the transit of Venus and gave Astronomer Point its name. The narrow mouth of a stream on the south corner of this bay is now named Cook Stream and was used to careen his ship for repairs. Only just wide enough for the hull, they turned the yard arms parallel to the ship to miss the trees. The crew fed well on blue cod, game meat, garden vegetables, and brewed Remu beer. The following day, while visiting Cascade Cove, we found a great northwest shelter spot, right up in the back of the bay. We did not stop as our destination for the day was in a Luncheon Cove. This truly delightful cove is the most secure anchorage in Dusky Sound. You could safely be there in a cyclone. Dropping our anchor in the centre of this cove, we backed in to pick up heavy stern lines already provided, and then put a further stern line ashore to a stout tree. Having settled in, we saw that a seal colony inhabited the back of the cove, not 50 metres away. Curious youngsters observed us from their rocks, while Mum laid about watching. The next morning we were able to watch these energetic and unafraid seal pups real close, as they played in the shallows and learned seal stuff. Colin was sure they were learning boy and girl stuff as well. One brown-coloured seal pup seemed to enjoy swimming at us while upside down, and his flippers folded across its belly. It was a special moment in the sun, until Mum growled from the bush suggesting we should shove off and leave her kids alone. Given the right weather, you could spend a month around here easily. However, this time of the year it's getting colder, and our Dickinson heater is running most nights. Many layers of warm clothing and beanies were required during the mainly overcast and drizzly days.
Well, we're departing Luncheon Cove and all the lovely islands and seals and sharks, and winding our way out through this yet another little narrow channel Pete seems to love. And once we pop out there, we'll be in the main entrance and into the Tasman and heading for Chalky.
The wind turned round to the northwest, so off we went south again, this time getting a really great sail in fresh conditions, albeit in a lively sea. Scooting down one large wave, we reached a maximum of 9.7 knots, but our average was around 6. A very, very cautious drive mid-passage was made manageable by having 3 reefs in our mainsail. Getting the course change wrong in rough seas can be hazardous, and the boom is much easier to control when not being driven by a lot of sail. We rounded Cape Providence a little after midday on the 19th of April and headed into Chalky Inlet, heading through Western Passage to our intended anchorage at Northport. Chalky Inlet and Preservation Inlet share the same 10-mile wide entrance, separated by Chalky Island, Gulch's Head and Cold Island, and the comparatively shallow water can create massive swells in strong southwesterly conditions. The topography here is also noticeably different to the northern fjords. It looks more like Great Barrier. Northport is tucked in behind Great Island, forming an almost totally enclosed anchorage. At the northeastern end of Northport, a small passage leads into a very secure anchorage, tucked in behind yet another small island. On the beach alongside us lay the remains of the steamship Stella, once used as a freezer storage facility for the cod industry. This once proud clipper steamship, still showing her graceful lines, was laid there to rest in 1926 and sadly is now a rusting hulk of metal. After 2 nights sheltering in here, we moved to explore Edwardson Sound, anchoring in Lake Coves at its head.
Well, we just pulled into another little inlet just off the side of the Sounds. We're almost at our destination, but we just pulled in here to see what it was like because we could see the waterfalls coming down the cliff. And as you can see, there's just foam everywhere all over the water, just from the volume of water that's come out since last night's rain.
As the name suggests, it looks and feels like a lake, with one river, 2 small waterfalls and a cataract emptying into it. We floated in dark tea-coloured fresh water. The cataract is from the small cliff down which the outflow of Lake Cadman continues through geological time, the excavation of a 1/4 mile long, 100 metre wide trench. It'll be a great sight when that excavation ends up at the edge of the lake. An amazing amount of bubbly white froth floats past us constantly. Sadly, the sandflies were in abundance, once again feeding on our body juices, especially liking the taste of column. We motored back to Edwardson Sound, then on to Coonaris Sound, ending up in Southport for the night of the 24th of April. Through a lot of the time in Chalky Inlet, we were waiting for the northwest blow to lay down so that we could get round Gulch's Head and into Preservation Inlet. On the morning of the 25th, the weather report said Pusica Point wind speed had dropped to variable, so off we went. The prudent course would have been round the outside of Balleny Reef, but because of the shallow water, we would have meant a 9 or 10 mile hike in bouncy seas. Our chart indicated rough water in the narrow passage between Gulch's Point and Balleny Reef, where the depth reduced to 13 metres. These disturbed seas, I reasoned, were likely to be limited to the 1 mile stretch between the 2 features. With no wind, the mixture of leftover swells created a great washing machine, rolling us heavily for about 20 minutes as we passed through. One steep wave seemed to launch us half out of the briny. There was not a lot of room for error or mishaps, and it left a dry taste in the mouth of the skipper. We arrived safely in Cuttle Cove around 14:30, where there is supposed to be the remains of a whaling station, but there was no obvious signs. About 3 miles away across Preservation Inlet lay the entrance to Long Sound, which at 14 miles long is the longest of all sounds.
Been motoring up Long Sound for probably about an hour. Got about another hour to go to get to the top. Colin, having been up the front observing, taking photos, will now model the latest gear for the Antarctic-type conditions that's on Tamariki today. Looks like he's in the bloody tropics, doesn't it? So what do you think, Colin? Is it cold enough for you?
Freaking cold.
Freaking cold. Even the Kiwi's got her gloves on. What gloves have you got on? Oh, I've got fingerless gloves and everything today. We're all wrapped up in coats. It's bloody cold.
At the head of the Long Sound we anchored in Cascade Basin, and what a magic Jurassic Park-like place it was. There were ancient trees everywhere, some broken with age, some still standing, but with signs of age, some new ones. All the older ones were covered in green, multicoloured mosses. Water dripped everywhere. At low tide we were able to walk ashore on the exposed river delta, composed mainly of golf ball-sized multicoloured pebbles. The visual effects of these different colours were incredible, especially when viewed from the multi-hued green mosses adorning the branches of the overhanging trees.
Well, believe it or not, after almost 2 weeks, we have blue sky. Unbelievable. We almost didn't recognise it. And we're just heading in just for a quick look into this little cove in here. It's called Last Cove. We're actually on our way back down Long Sound. It's a beautiful little place. Unfortunately, the sun's disappeared again. Just coming in now to Lady Bay, and there's a little island we're going to go and tuck in behind, or we might just drop the pick and have lunch. Well, we've got a gorgeous day on the fjords today. Sun has come out, it's warm, it's beautiful. A couple of layers have come off, but we're heading down towards the end of the point where Pickersgill is, and we're going to look and anchor and see if we can do a walk through to Pickersgill. Well, we've left Pete sitting guarding the boat, and we've come ashore to the oil house, which is where they used to leave all the oil for the lighthouse. And we've found the first thing we've come across is the graveyard, the ubiquitous historical graveyard. So there's Ruth Hart, 1926, Trains Cromarty, 1895. There was a town here called Cromarty, just about a mile or two further out the coast. Well, there it is, the infamous Pickersgill lighthouse. It's actually not very much of a lighthouse, very short, but then we're up on a nice big peak and very visible to everything. There's no old houses remaining, there's just foundations, but I think about 5 or 6. Would have been a neat little place to live, apart from the weather. I can see why Keith has good memories of it. Great view, great fishing, great crayfish. Lovely little spot.
During our nightly radio schedules with Mary, the first station on her list is always Kisbee Lodge, which of course we had to visit to see for ourselves. This private hunting lodge in Kisbee Bay is an oddity in a national park, and it sits on the site in the original settlement of Cromarty. If the owners or guests are not present, it's possible to visit the lodge after obtaining permission from the custodian. Our custodians for this night were Alan and Pat, two retired mates who were to be in residence for the next 3 weeks. What interesting and absorbing men they were. They had both spent their entire working lives researching, looking after, relocating, cataloguing and protecting New Zealand's birds, and in some cases saving species from extinction. The stories they shared were inspiring, and efforts such as theirs should be acknowledged publicly, because without the work of people like them and the many volunteers working alongside, our country's bird life would be much the worse off. When Pat asked us to stay for dinner, we provided 2 bottles of great South Island red wine, compliments of Shirley, to accompany the fresh caught venison covered in bacon and onion with baked Southland spuds lathered in butter. It was a great evening, great company, and in great surroundings. As an additional bonus, as we left, Pat asked if we could take charge of 2 crayfish they had been given. Pat and Alan joined us on board for coffee the next morning. So it was time to make our final journey south. At 15:30 hours on the 29th of April, we left Kisbee Bay and motored out through the small passage known as Otago Retreat and into Fogo Strait, bound for Stewart Island. During our journey through Fiordland, from Milford Sound to Preservation Inlet, we travelled 375 miles visiting 19 sounds or inlets, motored 100 hours, burned 350 litres of diesel. Our diesel heater was needed on most nights in April and occasionally first thing on the colder mornings. In the last 3 weeks, we saw the sun on only 3 days. Our enclosed cockpit and heater allowed us to enjoy the trip. My crew of Akimi and Colin have been amazing. The sandflies are annoying.